fitting him. I'm indifferent.
I don't believe in God.
To the existence of
God is not judging them.
I don't have proof.
I don't know how to pray.
They're judging themselves.
You know, where is God in all of this? This is my home.
God exists.
What does it say about God that he created the orgasm?
I don't pledge allegiance to anything.
I don't pray.
Only to God.
If there was a God,
And I thought,
I just have this understanding that life is hard.
he could never love me after this.
God is still good.
Hey there, Maybe God family. Welcome to our YouTube channel. Today I am in our studio here in Houston, Texas, recording an interview for an upcoming episode of the podcast that will center around and explore the always fascinating topic of angels and demons. So the experiences that we're going to be sharing with you today are the kinds of stories and experiences that really affect all kinds of people, religious and non-religious, spiritual and skeptical alike. Now, before I introduce today's expert and our guest for this interview, if you have any personal experiences to share, if you have any stories or even questions about something you hear in this interview, I just want to encourage you to share those with us. And we would love to hear those. You can just voice them in the comments section here on YouTube, and we would love to enter into conversation with you about those. Now, to help us with today's topic, we are joined by Dr. Dale Allison. Dr. Allison is a New Testament professor at Princeton Theological Seminary in Princeton, New Jersey. He's also the author of several books, and his latest is called Encountering Mystery: Religious Experience in a Secular Age. I highly recommend it. So welcome, Dr. Allison. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks for having me, Eric. Although I have to correct you already.
Of course.
Because you called me an expert, and I'm not sure anybody is an expert in this field. This is really difficult stuff.
I hear that.
Right?
I hear that, and
Yeah.
I will retract that, all right? But let me tell you, that was not in my notes. That was not part of the script. I just have gotten so used to hearing you speak on this topic now that I've done all this research. To me, you're an expert. And compared to me, you're definitely an expert. So.
Okay, so maybe compared to you, but not for myself. I'm not. I'm still learning and always at the beginning, always starting off.
I hear that. Well, I'm so glad that you've given us this time, and I know that our listeners are going to be really enriched and blessed by your input on this topic. So you've written several books over the years. I mean, you are an academic through and through, just hardcore New Testament exegesis and high-level academic on all things New Testament. And this seems a little bit different, this work you're doing now. And I am so much an admirer of this. At this stage in your career, you're just sort of going all out, devil may care. I mean, no pun intended, but like you're just going for it, and you don't really mind what other people or other academics might think by you going out on a limb and writing books about angels and demons. So, what was it that led you to write this book at this stage in your career?
Well, so part of it is that I'm at this stage in my career, and I don't have to go before any more committees and seek promotion. I'm a full professor, and I'm tenured. I already have, a fairly, if I may say so, a fairly decent reputation in my field. So at this point, I don't really care what people think. The truth is that I wrote a book somewhat like this book in the early 1990s. So almost 30 years ago, I wrote a book like this, but I was an adjunct professor at that time. I was not on a faculty with a full-time teaching job. And after I wrote this book, I just thought, this is too strange, it's too weird. No one's ever going to hire me if I publish this now. So there are actually a few paragraphs and pages in the current book that are, stolen from that earlier manuscript, which I was afraid to do anything with.
Is that
so
right?
It's just being at this stage of my career, and it's also, I guess, being honest. If you read my books, even my hardcore academic books, if you read the footnotes very carefully, you could see the person who wrote this book lurking in the shadows. But at this point, what do I care? Death is approaching. I've already done most of the things I want to do. So why not be honest?
Oh,
right?
I love it. I love it.
So in some sense, this book is maybe even more of who I am than all the other academic stuff I've done, although I care deeply about this. But this is the stuff that got me going in the first place. So the book actually begins with a personal episode of a mystical rapture when I was 16. And if you look at my history, that's why I ended up being a New Testament scholar. One thing led to another, but the beginning of it is this overwhelming mystical, whatever you want to call it, that made me just not be able to think about anything but God and religious subjects and so on.
Can you tell us about that experience just a little bit?
Well, I can try, but the problem is it's one of those experiences for which you don't have words. And one of the things that you constantly run in the mystical literature is, well, I don't know how to put this in words, or it's ineffable. So I have to preface it by saying that. But I was 16 years old. I was in my parents' backyard. I was under the Kansas night sky. At that point in time, you could still see stars. You could actually see lots of stars. I do not remember what I was doing at that moment, except just sitting by myself in the dark and thinking. And then out of the blue, I didn't seek this. I didn't expect it. I didn't prepare for it. It was as though, and again, as though, this is really important because I don't know what sense it makes, but the way I conceptualized it was that the stars came down and they were somehow around me, and then they announced somehow, I don't know how, the presence of this overwhelming power or reality or transcendent something. Of course, immediately afterwards, I used the word God because that's what my culture had given me. That's the only word that matched this thing. And whatever this reality was, it turned everything upside down because in the moment, which lasted 20 seconds, something like that, it was like, this is what's really real, and the rest of my life is somehow less real than this thing that I've just experienced. And so it became the most important thing in my life. And I've spent a lifetime, in effect, trying to come to terms with it. But it was an overwhelming presence. It was transcendent, and yet it was immanent. It was terrifying and overpowering, and yet loving. How all those things go together in one moment, I have no idea. I have no explanation for this.
Yeah.
But that's what happened. And then afterwards, of course, I wanted to talk to people about this. And this is Wichita, Kansas in 1972, and I'm a high school student. And the only people who want to talk about God are evangelical Christians. So what happens very quickly is that I leave my parents' liberal church and I go hang out with evangelicals for a while because they're the ones who have experiences that they can talk about, and they can actually hear my testimony and then they can interpret it for me. And, they told me that I'd been saved and that Jesus had come into my life and that I was a new creature and so on. So they put a conversion lens onto it. And
did that make sense to you? Did that compute?
It did at the time. It doesn't now. Because, well, the problem is it was a sort of conversion experience. But I was already going to church, and I already believed in God. I already said prayers. I thought the Bible was important, even though I didn't read it. And I was not a wild kid. I was actually a very good, tame person. I wasn't turning from drugs or whatever. I wasn't hanging out in a bad gang. I was just a nice little innocent teenager. So in retrospect, there was no Christological element in it, no clear Christological element, but that's what they told me, and I did accept that at the time, and then I went to an evangelical church for, I don't know, a little over a year, I guess. And
so when you say that there are, more liberal churches, I guess, for lack of a better word, where people might have these experiences, but they can't talk about them, what would have happened to you if you had first come out and shared it at your home church or with your tribe?
I think people would have politely listened and then as quickly as they could move on to the next subject. I don't think they would have had a way to talk about it. So that's one of the things I'm doing in this book. I'm not just an academic in this book. I'm also a sort of journalist. I call myself a journalist in the preface. And what I mean by that is I'm reporting on things that people should know, but they don't know. And one of the things they don't know, or many people don't know, including many people in churches, especially mainstream churches, is how common experiences like the one I just related to you are, how common mystical raptures are, how common it is to be enveloped by a sense of love when there's nothing there. It's just this invisible something that's wrapping around you, or how common it is to be utterly terrified and feel like you're in the presence of some sort of evil force or spirit or power or something like that. So I could go on, but the point is that I wrote this book in part because people simply are unaware of all the data and all the stories and all the scholarship now that we have on so-called religious experiences. So I guess the first point of the book would be to say, hey, look, these things are going on all around us. We actually have in parts of our culture a culture of censorship, that is, people have things happen to them that are really, really important to them, and they don't know how to talk to other people about them, or they don't know how to express what's happened to them. And I give multiple examples of this throughout the book. It's one of the themes. The theme, in effect, is this happened to me. It's the most important thing that's ever happened to me, and I don't talk about it.
Wow.
And I would be embarrassed, or people would think I'm crazy, and so on.
Yeah, right. It's got to be agonizing to keep that to yourself for a lifetime. Was the experience when you were 16, was that the only time you had a sort of, let's call these angelic, or let's call these the light side of, these experiences? Were there others along the way?
Yeah, So, there's an interesting question. Why do some people have certain kinds of experiences and others do not? I have some speculation on that, which is nothing but speculation. But for whatever reason, and it's not because I seek experiences, or, it's not because I ingest drugs or even am that good of a meditator or anything like that. It's just that things happen to me. So I think of a couple of other things that I talk about in the first chapter of the book. One was this absolutely blissful moment when I was in graduate school. So I'm in my early 20s, and I'm walking by a window. This is the window in my apartment that overlooks the cemetery. And I'd looked out at the cemetery often. It was very peaceful. I liked it. Nobody was ever walking around in the cemetery. It was just trees and flowers and so on. But there was this one time when I was looking out the window, and out of nowhere, the scene just changed. And it felt like I was seeing beneath the scene, or what's really underneath all these flowers and the grass and the trees. And it was, again, another sort of rapture, a few moments of bliss. At the time, in the experience, I thought this is the Garden of Eden, or this is what it must have been like in the Garden of Eden. I saw colors I had never seen before. The plants and the trees became like crystals. They became like jewels. They became like emeralds and rubies and diamonds, and they were glistening. And the sense was, this is what's real, and we're usually blind. That is, an analogy I later thought of for this experience was the way some people interpret the transfiguration of Jesus, which holds Jesus was not transfigured. The disciples had the scales fall from their eyes just for a few seconds to see what was always there, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so that's how this felt. Like the scales fell from my eyes. We're always in the Garden of Eden. We're just blind, and we usually don't see it. And that experience is really common. As soon as I had this experience, I went looking for parallels, and I found them all over the place. This is a really common experience throughout the world, and it includes many modern people.
So what did these? I'm sorry. What?
I'm just going to say, there's nothing special about me. These are really common. This is really common.
Yeah, but you had to go through the experiences to start the search for others. And when you went through these, what were your takeaways from these experiences about God? What did they show you or reveal to you about God? Because I've heard you twice now in both these instances immediately attribute these experiences to God. What did you come away thinking about him or feeling about him?
So several of my so-called mystical experiences have to do with nature. So the one I just related to you has to do with trees and grass and flowers, and the previous one had to do with the stars and being outdoors. So I have this very strong conviction that God is somehow present in nature, and potentially present in nature maybe in ways that we can't tune into otherwise. I've never had a mystical rapture staring at a TV screen or a computer screen, or being inside what I call the places of concrete. It just there's something special about nature. So that's the first thing. There's some sort of connection for me between God and the natural world. The second thing for me is that these experiences are just things to be received. It didn't feel like I produced them, and it didn't feel like I earned them, and I wasn't expecting them, and I wasn't pursuing them. They truly came out of the blue. They were as surprising as it would be if right now I had a mystical experience out of nowhere. I'm not expecting, talking to you, Eric, to have a mystical rapture.
Well, I don't know why not.
If I did, if it did, it would be completely unexpected. And these were completely unexpected. So I use the traditional Christian language of grace. These were just experiences of grace. I didn't earn them. I didn't deserve them. They just happened. And the other thing, which is maybe the hardest of all, is that on several occasions I've run into something or had this mystical experience, and inside of it I'm thinking, this is what's really real. And my ordinary, mundane life, while terribly important, and that's where I have to live and follow the golden rule and all that stuff, somehow it's not as real as these transcendent things that I've bumped into a handful of times in my life. So I come away with the lesson, things really aren't what they seem. I've decided that below, beneath, beyond, outside, whatever the right word is, the world that we normally experience through our ordinary senses, behind and beyond that are other worlds and other realities. And I think that actually underneath this all is transcendent love and bliss, because I don't know, I've been there or experienced it or seen it. I had another experience once, and again, this is in the book, and it's right at the beginning. I had this experience of waking up one morning and sort of leaving my bedroom. Again, I don't know how to conceptualize this, but I was in some sort of heavenly place, and I'll spare you the very weird details, but I
like
wrote it
weird
down.
details.
Well, the only word I could come up with was I was in a place where these bird souls were flying around, and it was just bliss and ecstasy, and you simply have no words for it. And the thought came immediately afterwards that if you could dump all of the woes and the miseries and the horrors of the world into that place, they would simply evaporate in an instant. That is, this reality overwhelms all of our other reality. And, I don't know how to, I don't say that to a person who's in the middle of a hellish time or has suffered horribly. But I did feel that, somehow, someday, maybe that's our fate, and the horrible things will no longer matter because they just don't hold up to this, whatever it was, overwhelming. I also thought a little bit about, Paul said he had this experience. He says this in 2 Corinthians, he went to the third heaven. And what he said was, I don't know if I was in the body or out of the body. I think he means he doesn't know if his mind or soul has gone somewhere else or he's having some sort of vision. He really can't quite make it out. I don't know what that was either. But this heavenly place of bliss, or whatever you want to call it, was again a natural scene. It wasn't a building, right? It wasn't even a religious temple. It was a place with birds and things like precious stones. It was a natural environment, right?
Well, I think it's interesting. I as the outstanding academic that you are, I just don't expect to hear this sort of talk from someone whose books are being read in the most esteemed seminaries in the world and stuff. And because I've known enough academics and in my own experience as a student just to know that that's not typical, at least not in an overt or outward way. And it has to have required a lot of courage from you. The only other, maybe not the only other, one of the other academics that I've heard and you remind me of a lot is Alvin Plantinga in his Where the Conflict Really Lies book, where he talks about the difference or the battle not really being between faith and science, because science requires a good amount of faith, but the battle actually being between a sort of militaristic, militant, what did he say? Militant naturalism.
Yeah,
Materialistic naturalism versus a mysticism that sees what you're talking about, which is like, I've always talked about it like Frodo putting the ring on and seeing what's really going on around him, on the spiritual realm. But how challenging or how much of a risk has it been to you professionally or interpersonally with your peers to come out with these stories?
So when you use the word courage, I actually have to say no. It's taken no courage. I don't know why. I don't know how to explain. I'm not a psychologist, and I'm not really good at asking questions about why I am the way I am, all right? So it has taken no courage at all. It's just been fun. It's like I finally get to say who I really am, and I've enjoyed it, and that's it.
It's like you're coming out almost. It's almost like a coming out.
Yeah, it's like I'm coming out. But I think that I have enough of a reputation in the field that the people who don't like this or think that I've lost it, they'll talk about me behind my back. They won't talk to me about their problems to my face. So
Right.
I'm never going to know about this.
Ignorance is bliss.
But the comparison with Plantinga is partly apt, because one of the things I'm doing in this book is pushing back at points against naturalism, or what I call in the book reductive materialism, which looks at us and says everything can, in theory, be explained in terms of chemicals and electricity and pretty much contemporary science, that is, things we know now or will soon know. And there are points at which I suggest maybe not. Maybe there really are points at which things can't be explained with our ordinary categories. So there's pushback there. And I should add that there's pushback there because this is the world I was educated into. I was educated in public schools, and then I went to a public university, and I majored in philosophy, and all my professors were atheists. They were all atheists. And I also majored in religion, and I didn't get any theology. I just got comparative religion and, that sort of thing. So I was actually trained how to think about myself and life and religion and philosophy and everything important. I was trained to think about these things without any transcendent categories. I may have had this personal faith down there, but it was constantly being attacked by my teachers in one way or another. And I suppose I've had a chip on my shoulder ever since, right? I think they were wrong.
Yeah.
I think that they overstepped the boundaries of their disciplines at certain points and were making larger claims than they should have been making.
Yeah.
I remember there was this poor professor of religion at my college, and he was very interested in religious experience and had written some things even on near-death experiences, and he was just like a leper. And I didn't take any classes with him because I didn't want to take any classes with him. I didn't want to be
You might
sullied. Yeah, well, the professors I was working with would not have liked it. They didn't want me to mess with they would have thought of him as a sort of wooey New Ager kind of guy, right?
Right.
And he's not serious. He's not serious because he's looking at experience, and we're serious here where we work with our our historical categories and cross-cultural comparison and all this stuff.
Right.
So I've spent my whole life kind of undoing what they taught me. Right?
Wow.
Because I really do. The first time I look at a text, no matter what it is, I'm full of skepticism, and I'm full of historical questions, and I'm a doubter. That is part of who I am, and part of that is good, but I think it went too far. Right?
Right, sure.
So,
and I can relate to that to a certain degree. I mean, I had similar experiences in college and seminary. I also, as part of a mostly white Western Protestant denomination, the United Methodist Church, which I recently have left, I have just distinct and clear memories my whole life of people talking about Methodists abroad who are more spiritual than us, and it's sort of like a bless your hearts kind of thing. Bless their hearts. They're so cute. It's almost like a really arrogant, looking down their civilized noses at those poor people who once they grow up like us and get civilized, and they'll figure it out. But till then, we'll put up with them like we do kids in the nursery. And little did we know, or they know back then, that where the real power and wisdom lay. And we have churches now exploding all over Africa and Asia and South America, and the church in the civilized world, quote unquote, is all but dead. And because the real power was in, letting yourself experience God and not just conceive of him intellectually.
Yeah. So, I've been a Presbyterian much of my life, and I think it's fair to say that we have been condescending to charismatics and Pentecostals, and we don't take them seriously. And it really is, like you said, we sort of, that's okay for them, but, we're educated, and we look at things very, 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 very differently than they do. I think that this has been part of mainstream Protestantism from the beginning. So one of the difficult things, or one of the facts about early Protestants, is they have to learn to explain away all the Roman Catholic miracles and all of these incredible stories that the Roman Catholics have, because they were interpreted as though they justified or proved the truth of Roman Catholic doctrine.
Right.
And so the Protestants very early on become very adept at saying, your stories didn't happen. And they can think in terms of hallucination. They can think in terms of rumor. They can think in terms of people, faking it and lying. Early on, actually in the 17th century, we're getting some sophisticated psychological moves, people trying to explain away certain things that are going on in the world.
Right.
So we have a long Protestant habit of, it goes back to the beginning, for the mainliners, anyway, like the Reformed tradition and the Lutherans and then the Anglicans. And if you know anything about the Protestant tradition, you'll know that at some point the word enthusiasm is a dirty word.
Yep.
They are the enthusiasts, right? and all you have to do to deride Methodists is to say something like, well, some of them perform exorcisms.
Yeah.
And, and then that, you don't have to think about them anymore. As soon as you've said that,
off the reservation.
They're out to lunch.
Right.
They're
exactly.
out to lunch.
Yep. Yeah, it's unfortunate. And I think maybe the church, as it has declined, maybe it will open itself up again to, this more full experience. I just remember learning like Jesus didn't miraculously feed the 5,000. Everybody just showed up and contributed their own food because Jesus was generous with some kids' food or something, and then things like, I don't know, all kinds of explaining away demons with schizophrenia. It was a big one when I was growing up in school, but. We could spend the whole hour on that. I want to be sure to get to the angels portion of our conversation here, if I could move us along, because this is a part of our conversation that people are tuning in for more than anything else. They want to know about angels. They want to know what angels are, what the Bible says about angels. And I appreciate how you just come out and say, look, a lot of the things people say are angel experiences might not technically be angels. But who are we to say, right? Like, maybe that's not the bone we should pick with these kinds of stories. Can you explain a little more your take on angels?
Well, so there's a chapter in the book on angels, and I think it's the most critical book. So the most critical part of the book. So I start out with a story about the famous Hollywood actor, or at least one-time famous Hollywood actor, Mickey Rooney, who's in a restaurant and a busboy comes by and he's blonde and, he's dressed in white and he says some things to Mickey Rooney and then he leaves and these words get to Mickey Rooney and they actually help change his life and help turn things around. And after he's thought about these words for a few minutes, he wants to go thank this busboy, right? And of course, the whole point of the story is he talks to people, searches. There is no such, being there.
Right.
And in our culture, when you are helped by someone who appears out of nowhere and then disappears, that is an angel story. I actually decided to write this chapter because there are lots and lots and lots of books on angels, and academics or people in my field don't take them seriously at all. What they tend to be collections of stories. Now, I think they're interesting because most of these books are collections of first-hand stories. That is, most of these aren't legends. They're not second or third, fourth hand. They're not friend of a friend tales, folk tales, as the folklorists call them, friend of friend tales.
Right.
They're actually people saying, this happened to me. So what I think goes on in our culture is that there are 8 or 9 or 10 things that when they happen to people, they think angel. That is, we have a category, angel. So sometimes when people hear a voice in their head and it turns out it tells them to do something and it's important and they did it and good things happened, they'll look back and say, oh, well, that must have been an angel, or they'll say guardian angel, right?
Right.
Or when a stranger shows up and helps somebody, especially if that person is dressed in white and then just disappears, that becomes an angel story. Or one of the really interesting things I found about these books are the anti-gravity stories.
Oh, wow.
And these are stories where somebody is, falling and then they feel hands on the back, and instead of falling on the ice or falling in front of the traffic, something like that, they're stood up and in effect rescued, and they turn around, and of course nobody's there. So we have a bunch of stories, and they all get pushed together in these books as angel stories. By the way, the anti-gravity stories are angel stories, I think, because of Psalm 91 and Luke 4 and Matthew 4. There is a passage about how the angels will lift you up, and Satan says to Jesus, throw yourself off the temple, right? And the angels will catch you. So already in the Bible, you have the notion that angels can perform anti-gravity tricks, right?
Sure,
in effect.
That's so one of their calling cards.
Yeah, so if you have an anti-gravity thing, you say angel. Or if you have a vision of a white luminous figure, and it's not Uncle Fred or somebody it's just who the heck is that? In our culture, we say angel.
When
right?
let me just pause. When you say white, you mean like dressed in white and like bright?
Yeah, dressed in white. Because again, you remember in the Bible, angels sometimes mysteriously show up and then they disappear.
Right.
They often don't have entrances or exits. They're just here and gone. So when that happens, you think angel. But also, think, for example, of the angel at the empty tomb in the Gospels. That person is dressed in white, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you have motif white clothing
Right.
and show up and disappear. So that if you have things that happen like that, then you plug it in to angels. So my
Sure.
point here is that we actually have a number of experiences that happen to people, or at least they say they happened or think they happened to them, and then they plug into angels, but they're all very different. It's a set of different experiences.
Are there similarities though? Common
Well,
threads?
I think the main similarity is whatever happens is good. Too, it's unexplainable, right? And then there's some category which allows you to or a set of characteristics that allows you to plug it into the category of angel. But, how do you evaluate these stories? So I have a section in there where I talk about anti-gravity stories. And, I know that time can be experienced in a relative fashion. I know sometimes people fall out of buildings and aren't hurt. I even cite an incredible account of a young girl who fell out of an airplane when it blew up in the sky from lightning. And she fell all the way down and she survived. She had some bumps and bruises. Anyway, cats fall out of buildings a lot. That proverbially.
But those are from hell, so that's a different. I'm not a cat person.
Well,
Sorry.
we're not going to get any cats. I'm a cat lover. Anyway.
Is this interview over? Sorry.
Anyway, the point is that when you get a particular story, you often don't know what to do with it if you think about it critically. Because, look, we can't be credulous. People do misperceive. People do misremember. People do exaggerate in the telling. These are all things that we know,
Sure.
right?
Absolutely.
So what you have to do here is you have to do at least two things. One is you have to look for patterns in the stories, right? So these stories, any particular story, unless it happened to me or somebody I know really well and I've quizzed them at length, I can't tell you what happened. But if I see the same sort of story repeated many times, then I can say maybe we have a phenomenon here, right?
Yeah.
And then the question is, if we have a phenomenon, do I go back to my college professors who knew how to explain away everything? Or do I occasionally say, you know what, this looks really interesting, and I'm not sure that it can be explained away if it happened as recounted. So one of the stories in this book has to do with a woman who comes out of her back door, and there was a railroad track behind her house, and a train is coming, and her child, who's very, very young, is playing on the railroad tracks. And the woman realizes, I don't have time to get there, so my kid is going to be killed. And then she says, now this is her story. I wasn't there. I don't know this person. I'm just telling you the story.
Sure.
Her story is that as she was watching her child on the tracks and the train was coming and she was terrified, she saw a being of light, a luminous figure, lift her child off the tracks, right, to the other side of the tracks. And then the train went by. And when the train was gone, she ran over, and there was her child unharmed. Okay?
Yeah.
So I would say that if that happened to me, I'd say angel.
Right.
All right? I just say angel. You might be able to explain it in some other way. You might say, well, I projected a hallucination and telekinetically moved my kid off the track. I did it myself. But that's not what I would do.
Right.
But I can't tell you because I wasn't there and I don't know this person.
Sure.
But again, if this happened, this is a case where, your you're tempted to say angel.
Sure,
right?
of course. I mean, I think especially if that's the culture and lexicon that you are raised with, right? So the question I would have is, I'm a skeptically minded person by nature. I look at this and I go, well, are all these people that are seeing angels people that were going to church already and sort of preconditioned to want to see angels? Is it biased confirmation, or is there more to it than that?
No. There's a lot more to it than that. So we have lots of studies of visions now, and especially a lot of really interesting stuff going on around deathbed visions. So it turns out the elderly and people who are near death frequently have visions that are not the typical hallucination. They're not the frightful bats that are, flying out of the television and terrifying you. They're not that sort of thing. Usually they are figures, and usually they are people, dead people that you know. But once in a while, someone will see a luminous figure, and they don't recognize this figure, and the figure actually may not have discernible features in the face. It's just sort of like a
amorphous
glowing
kind of
figure without features. And then people in our culture, right, they will say angel. Now, one of the things I found that was really interesting is that, and this is the sort of thing that pushes back against reductionism or materialism or whatever you want to call it, is that occasionally it's not just the dying person who reports a vision. Sometimes there was somebody else in the room who says, I saw it too. Or I found a couple of cases of hospice workers who said, yeah, I was talking to the patient and we were both seeing the same thing, right? Another thing, to go back to your confirmation bias business, is that occasionally you'll get reports from people who said, I don't believe this religion stuff. I don't believe in God. When you're dead. But now I'm seeing this luminous figure at the end of my bed, and I'm thinking, well, maybe there's something more, and it's really there, and I may have to change my mind about things. So the point there is that sometimes people see visions that don't fit. I remember this really fascinating vision, which is in the book, from this little girl, and she's dying, and she's reporting what she's seen, and her parents are traditional Christians, and they think she should be in John 14 or in the book of Revelation, and she should be seeing mansions and streets of gold and all this stuff, and she's not seeing any of it. And she's reporting to them what she's seeing. It's mostly figures, right? And she's not reporting what they want, and they say, come on, honey, and she sticks to her guns. And so that's not confirmation bias. It's actually a vision in which we have the record of this, of the people trying to talk her out of what she's seeing so that it fits what they expect, but she's not seeing it. And in the modern world, the parallel for that is the case, again, number of cases, actually quite a few now, of people who don't believe anything, and then they start seeing things near death, and they begin to think, oh, I was wrong about things. Yeah,
we've done a couple of episodes now on near-death experiences and sort of near-death adjacent sort of stuff, and those are some of our most listened to episodes, and some of the most, for me personally, just profoundly eye-opening, because you can explain a lot of it away, but you can't explain all of it away. Not as a catalog of stories that work together. It's too much. It's too much evidence.
So I do have a little I have a chapter on near-death experiences, and one of the things that I emphasize there is that we do have reports from on-the-scene medical personnel, nurses, doctors, surgeons, and so on, who are working on patients while they are unconscious and unaware. And then the patient wakes up and says something to the doctor which indicates that they knew what was going on when they couldn't have known, or they've seen something they couldn't have seen. And, again, you can dismiss one of these, you might dismiss two of them, but if you're at the point where you actually now have hundreds, which you do, you now have well-investigated stories that run into the hundreds of medical personnel saying, this person could not have known X, but this person woke up and told me about X. Once you have a lot of those, you begin to wonder, what does the skeptic do? Right?
Right, yeah. No, it's true. And then once you come around to sort of semi-faith in angels, like I did when I came to actual relationship with Jesus in 2013, I sort of inched my way toward a deeper faith in him and in his word. But I still held things like angels at arm's length. I was still like, well, these things exist, but they are a certain kind of being. Every time they show up in the Bible, I remember preaching this in 2014. Every time they show up in the Bible, they're these fearsome, awful creatures that scare everybody because the first line when they show up is always, do not be afraid, right? Don't be afraid. It's like they must be really ugly and awful. And so I conceived of them as being sort of these just vast and unknowable creatures, really. And then you get slapped in the face with something like Matthew 18:10, where Jesus says, see that you do not look down on any of these little ones, for I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. And your mind just goes, like, what are we, like, why are we limiting the image of angels to something academic?
So I was taught in graduate school that when angels show up in the Bible, they are a literary motif. Mm-hmm. And I actually remember reading in a book by Raymond Brown, who is a very well-known Roman Catholic scholar, about the angel in the Gospel of Mark. You know, he's not here, he's risen. This is a literary motif. And when I wrote about that later on, I said, okay, maybe it's a literary motif. On the other hand, people do see figures of light a lot. It's not an unusual circumstance. So you're going to have to do more than just say it's a literary motif. You're going to have to show that it's a literary motif, right?
Right.
And I think myself that, and this is, again, one of the themes of the book, that so many beliefs we have are experientially based. So I think we believe in evil spirits because people, in effect, run into them. And I think we believe in angels because things happen to people, and that's the interpretation that they offer.
So earlier you said that, I'm sorry to interrupt you, you said that there are certain people who just seem to have these experiences while others don't. And you have some theories about why that is. Could you open up that box for us a little?
Okay, so first of all, this is going back to my college professors. This is not theology. So this is actually biology. So here's the thing. I have had a number of experiences. I also think that I've seen the future vividly twice before it happened. My wife has similar experiences to me, and we've produced 3 children who have experiences similar to us. They have mystical experiences, and I won't go down the list. But this sort of thing, and by the way, my father had a boatload of stories and experiences, and my wife's family had the same thing. So I think that maybe, this is just a hypothesis, so I got to emphasize the maybe thing. But I think that some people are thinner than others. And what I mean is that there's a spectrum for everything. So some people are really tall, some people are short. Some people are born with out-of-the-box IQs, and some people just aren't. It's just how biology works, right? And
right.
You can think of any characteristic. Some people have big noses, some people have little noses, some people have big hands, some people have little hands. So everything runs a spectrum. So why not this? If there is another world or there are invisible realities, usually we are closed off from it or them. But once in a while, something breaks through. It makes sense to me to think that some people's, I don't know what you want to call it, membranes to the other world or their doors or whatever, sometimes they're thinner. And some people have really thick doors or thick membranes, and they'll just go through life and say, nothing unusual at all has ever happened to me, right? Or anybody in my family.
Yeah.
But then my family is just full of these things.
Yeah. Yep. No, I can relate to that. My wife's family is the same way. Everybody's had these experiences, and my side of the family not so much.
Okay. So the question then is, how do you work God into this? And that's part of why I objected at the very beginning of the show when you called me an expert. So I'm sitting here saying, I don't know how to think about that theologically, right?
Right.
I just don't. I don't know how to think about it theologically. But I like the old Celtic idea that there are thin places, that there are just these places where it seems that people more easily run into God or feel the divine presence or something like that.
Yeah.
Thin places. So maybe there are thin people, and maybe there's a spectrum.
Yeah.
Right?
And by that you mean just the membrane between these dimensions, so to speak, where it's easy, more easily passable.
Yeah, that's
Wow,
right.
that's awesome.
And maybe some people's membranes are too thin and they actually cause problems for them.
Right.
I actually think I know somebody who sees too many things and has too many experiences, and I think it gets in the way of ordinary life. I'm perfectly happy just to have something unusual.
Yeah, once every few years.
Once in a while, right?
Right.
So that's my speculation.
That's really
about
interesting.
That. But
one of the thin places that that you've talked and written about is the deathbed, so to speak, where there seems to be a lot of this sort of activity and a lot of this experience happening around death. Do you have any idea what purpose those sort of angelic experiences or appearances serve at the deathbed?
So I think the thing we can learn now, and this is from everybody. This isn't just from Christians. It's not just from religious people. This is from the psychologists and therapists and the hospice people. What they'll say is that these experiences are almost always beneficial, and they are comforting. People are also comforted at second hand. Now, not everybody is, but usually when somebody says, I just saw Uncle Fred or I saw my husband, and they're smiling and they're looking forward to reunion, the people around the deathbed are cheered, even if they think it might be an illusion, right?
Yeah.
But these experiences are positive. Now, they can also be puzzling. One of the weirdest things I discuss in this book is the motif of light around a body at the moment of death. It's really strange, but if you read the literature, there are hospice workers, a lot of them, who say, once or twice when I was with somebody who was dying, the face glowed or some kind of light left the body. And I found a number of these cases where multiple people are in the room and they're actually trying to figure out where is the light coming from. And they're not morons. They're opening the curtains, they're closing the curtains, they're turning the lights off, and they're still seeing something glowing. So this turns out to be what I would call a hagiographical motif. That is, there are stories of Christian saints dying, and they glow, or their face glows,
right.
or somebody sees something escaping. So those sorts of experiences can puzzle people, but for the most part, people come away reassured and feeling like the dying one is loved and is going on to some better place.
Is it just about the emotional comfort, or is it you said going on to some place? Are they being guided somewhere by these figures and in these visions? Are they being safe passage, sort of? Is that what this is?
Yeah. That's always the interpretation, and that's the interpretation going way back. You might remember the Gospel of Luke, chapter 16, the parable of the rich man and Lazarus.
Love it.
When the poor guy dies, the angels come for him, right? That's already a motif in literature way back when, and you can find it in Greek sources, you can find it in Roman sources. So this is
you
one
can
of
find
these
it in the
things.
movie Ghost. I don't know if you're familiar with that too. The old Patrick Swayze movie, same thing.
Yeah, I saw it many years ago. But the point is, I think people are having a similar experience actually in different cultures, and then of course it gets interpreted differently. But the thing that seems constant is that when you see figures, the interpretation is they're coming to help me, they're coming to assist me, they're coming to take me. In line with this, one of the fascinating things that we have learned recently is that, at least in the modern Western world, people who are dying, before they are dying and leading up to their death, they often use travel metaphors in very strange ways. They will say, I need to catch the bus.
Yeah.
Right? Or, I need, to get my suitcase. If you look at all of these metaphors and what people are saying, they're really interesting because they are not the conveyors. They're always being conveyed. So there's this sort of, I don't know if you want to call it natural revelation or something. There's this sense that I'm going somewhere else, but I'm not doing it. I'm not the driver.
Yeah.
I'm the passenger.
I love it. Yeah.
Right?
So interesting.
And I read one book, and this was written by a hospice nurse, and she said, I've never heard of anyone saying, I'm putting on my tennis shoes and I'm going for a run. They're not doing it. Right. It's always somehow, I'm waiting for the bus to come.
Right. There's a system
metaphor.
at work that they're not in control of, that they want to latch onto somehow and get to where they're going.
I'm hopping on the train, that
Amazing.
kind of, or I need to get my ticket, that kind
I got to get to the station. I've heard that one. Like literally someone saying, I've got to get to the station before they die.
Yeah, really? Okay.
Yeah.
It turns out that's really common. But again, this is something that, folklore knows, but only recently have people actually been collecting this stuff and doing analyses and so on. And at least from what I've read, there is a sort of implicit theology in these metaphors that people are using.
So you have said, I think this is a direct quote, you've said angel stories, since they supply evidence of God in a largely secular world, are implicit attacks on atheism. Does that ring a bell? I don't want to quote you out
I wrote that.
out of turn here. But so could you just help us understand what you're getting at there and why that's worth saying, why that's important?
Well, so that's one of the things that you find in these angel books constantly. I think that everybody lives in the secular world. So not everybody had my secular education, and not everybody went to college and had philosophy professors telling them that they were atheists. But if you live in our culture, there's not a lot of God in Amazon. There's not a lot of God in, big government, big education, big entertainment, and so on. We have these vast swaths of our world that are, for all purposes, secular, right? They're just secular.
Absolutely.
And we live our lives in them, whether we want to or not. So we, in effect, live secular lives. And if we want to push back against that, or if we think there's something more, we're always cheered by stories that say maybe there is something more, right? And if there's something more, then there's the possibility of theological language, there's the possibility of God talk and so on. If the world is nothing but Amazon, there is no God in it.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
There isn't. There's no religion in Amazon anywhere.
Yeah.
It may be that some of the people who drive trucks, for example, go to church. But the thing itself is not driven by any sort of faith. It's not driven by any sort of theism. It's a purely secular thing. And this is the world we all live in. And so even if we are sure in our convictions, we're always cheered that something else breaks in besides this monotonous secular reality.
Sure.
So that's what I mean. These angel books, they actually say there is a God. They say you are loved. They say you are cared for.
But they are mercilessly mocked in the culture. Those types of books are. Although I did notice yours don't. Your book doesn't have any negative comments yet, Doctor. I want to know how you did that. That's magical. And maybe it's a matter of time before they come for you. But
I'll ignore them.
That's probably wise. I think that just as sometimes Christians can be can be a little aggressive when it comes to striking out at arguments that, seem to go against our faith. Sometimes I see people on the other side of that argument, atheists and agnostics, that maybe are a little aggressive about things like this, these phenomena that are quantifiable and across cultural lines and chronological lines, and are evidence to contend with. And if you just try to explain it away, without much thought, it sort of belies a certain, like it's a threat. It belies a certain insecurity in the part of atheists when they do that.
Well, of course. Look, we all have worldviews, and we're all attached to them, right?
Right.
We have an emotional attachment to how we view things. And so when things happen that don't fit, we feel anxiety. So a lot of people would not like this book because if it's on the right track, then what they think is wrong. So, of course, they're going to be defensive, just as I'm defensive over against all my professors who were reductionists, right?
Right.
They make me anxious.
Yeah.
I have to go through their arguments, and to be fair, I have to say, are they right, or were they right, or what's the evidence here?
Yeah.
So that's always difficult, and we're always doing confirmation bias. We're
Sure.
always doing confirmation bias. That's what everybody is doing.
Yeah.
But I maybe I'm crazy and maybe I'm wrong, but I really do feel that we're at a point with some of these phenomena that the skeptical explanations just aren't very good anymore. I don't know what that does to the culture. For me, the way I see, I've told people I see this book sort of as prolegomena to the gospel. This is not theology proper. This is not the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's actually a book which says theological language is possible, right? Because we live in a world in which which is not the reductive world of materialism. We live in a world where there are invisible realities,
Right.
and so on. So,
I appreciate that. I want to talk, before we run out of time, and we've already run out of time, can you spend another 5 minutes with us?
Sure.
Talking about the other side of this reality, which we commonly call demons. And there are a lot of stories about demons and sort of a darker side of this spiritual phenomenon. Have you had any personal experiences on that side of this spectrum, like you had with those positive experiences when you were younger?
Okay, so there is a phenomenon which is now known as sleep paralysis. Mm-hmm. And it turns out, we did not know this. In fact, people didn't even know much of anything about this until, 35, 40 years ago now. But it's very common to wake up and to be in a complete panic and to feel that you can't breathe, to feel like you're going to die, to feel like maybe something is pressing down on your chest, and you can't move and you can't get out of it. Now, by the way, we do know, I think we know, the chemical explanation for what's going on, because when you dream, you may dream of running or hitting people or whatever. When people dream and they're moving, you can see their hands move a little or their feet move a little. You've seen cats or dogs dream,
Sure.
right? They're moving just a little. So there's actually a chemical that comes into the system when you're dreaming that prevents you from acting out the dream. All right.
Oh, wow.
So the hypothesis is that people are waking up and trying to move, and the chemical is still there, and they can't do it. But what's interesting about this, from your point of view, or this conversation, is that frequently, not always, but frequently, people who have this experience feel an evil presence in the room. They feel like there's an oppressive force, and they sometimes actually see this figure. And whatever the explanation is, more often than not, it's to the left and down by the feet. I have no idea what the physiological explanation
To the
of
left
that is.
and down by the feet.
Yeah, okay. anyway, many people who have this experience just chuck it off. They don't know what it is. Okay, that's terrible. I've had it twice. Both times I was petrified out of my mind. The second time especially. Totally petrified. And it did really feel like there was an evil presence in the room.
For how long?
10, 15 seconds.
Okay.
Now, what I have discovered through my research is that 15 to 20% of the population in the West right now has this experience at least once in a lifetime. Some people have it repeatedly, but it's a lot of people. And it very often comes with this sense of an evil, oppressive presence. But in addition to that, there are lots of reports, they've been cataloged, of people who are simply walking down a road or just going about their business, maybe trying to enter a restroom, something like this. And then they will feel this enveloping, threatening, oppressive presence, all right?
Does it freeze them?
It often does freeze them, right? It often does freeze them. So let's just put aside the explanation of that for a moment. One thing I would say is this helps us understand, this is not the only reason, but it helps us to understand why every single culture, to my knowledge, believes in evil spirits, because people feel that they've run into them. They feel, it's not that people just sat around and said, you know what, let's just invent evil spirits. That'd be a good one, right? And we'll tell stories. It's that people are wrestling with things that have happened to them. They also sometimes see these oppressive figures. My son had this happen to him a couple of years ago. He had an episode of sleep paralysis, and his description was something like an ape-like being, in the shadows that was threatening him and hated him and so on.
Wow.
Now, how do you think about these things? Well, I'm not sure. I think we have to have an open mind. I had a student once who wrote up for me in an email an account of him having this experience, and he was sleeping with his son at the time, and his son reported also the next day, independently of his father's experience, seeing a sort of shadow figure in the room.
Wow.
So the father thought, well, maybe I wasn't just hallucinating it. I don't know. So I think that the waking up and being scared and not being able to move, that probably can be explained pretty well now. But what is the evil presence that often comes with this, and what is the evil presence that people run into on other occasions? Again, you can ask questions about magnetic fields, and you can do all this stuff. But the first thing is that people have these experiences, and they don't say anything about your mental health, right?
Okay.
One other thing, the final thing I'll say about these experiences, which is very heartening to me because I'm a theist. So sometimes when people have these experiences of divine rapture and enveloping love, they have the sense that this is what it's really all about. This is the really real, right? But when people run into these evil, oppressive forces, I don't recall anyone saying that's ultimate reality. I don't recall that. So these experiences, from one point of view, are opposites or antithetical. But and you can say they're similar. It's the best and the worst. But I don't think anyone who experiences the worst ever says, okay, that's it.
That's the real thing.
But the people who have the other experience do. So that cheers me a little bit, right?
What do you make of it?
Fact.
Let's spell it out. What do you make of that, and how do you explain that?
Well, because I think I think that's just an accurate perception. There's nothing to fill out. I think when people run into this overwhelming divine love, they're running into overwhelming divine love. And when they're running into an evil, oppressive force, whatever that is, I don't know how to write the devil's biography, and I don't know how to sort out evil spirits. I'm actually of the opinion that if there are spirits, as I think they are, they may also be a spectrum, and our tradition may be misleading at points when it just thinks in terms of angels and demons. I think maybe there are other things out there.
Got some
also.
spirits in purgatory, or we got some
No,
non-binary spirits?
No. I really mean I don't know. I don't know. I have no story.
Yeah.
Right. So
I have no
you're getting
patience for agnostic spirits. I need them to pick a
Oh
team.
well, okay, but I'm not going to plug it into purgatory. I'm just going to say I don't know.
Yeah. Right.
And so, I would also say I think most of our ideas about Satan, this is my own view, as a biblical exegete, come from biblical passages where Satan has been read in. And I don't think Satan belonged there originally. I think most of our ideas about the devil are from bad exegesis. So I believe in these evil forces, but I don't really have a story. I can't say, well, there's a guy named Satan, and he was the highest angel, and he was full of pride, and then he fell, and, I can't tell a story. I believe in... So I think that the language about Satan and demons refers to real things, but I don't have a sort of story to tell about those things.
Yeah.
I don't know what or who.
Well, you
they
mentioned
are.
your son having a story. Is others in your family had similar experiences?
Oh yeah. So we've all run into evil things. All right, all of us. So if I include my 3 children and my wife and me, yes, just as we also run into wonderful things.
Have you
which is part of
experienced
why-
anything like, are these forces, these dark forces, dangerous in the same way that the angelic forces are benevolent? Are these malevolent, and do they have impact on you?
That's a really good question. I don't know how to answer it, because in every case, when we've been in the presence of something that we think of as evil, the only thought is to get out of there, right? And we've always been successful. We've never felt like whatever it was entered us or possessed us or followed us. It was always just yuck, horrible, run away,
Right.
and we succeeded in running away. So we have our memories of this, but I don't think in our cases there's been any lasting disability or whatever you want to call it from this. It's just running away. That's all that's happened to us. Now, that, of course, leads to other subjects like possession and exorcism
Right.
and so on. But I say on the last page of the book, there are many things that I've not discussed in this book, and one of them is, possession.
You're
and
channeling
exorcism.
John, right? John said the same thing. There are many things Jesus did, and so that could not
many
be
things.
included.
And that's what we're going to do on the podcast. There are many things on this podcast we're not going to talk about.
That's right.
And that's one of them, okay?
That's right. Well, I share a lot of your experiences and a lot of your frustrations with sort of the established academy in Christian education in the West, I guess, and how that sort of more liberal approach, I guess, fails to prepare us to deal with these realities. And I continue to wrestle to this day. Some of the things you said about the dark forces being like at the foot of the bed or to the left and at the foot. My wife, every time she's had this experience, is always in that spot, and it freaked me out when you said that. And then I had I had an experience when I was young. I was a teenager. My first job was cutting the lawn at a cemetery, a church cemetery. And I had this experience where I was in the oldest part of the cemetery, weed eating around the sunken graves of the original folks that were buried there first. And this purplish haze moved in around me. It was I felt it as a malevolent presence. And my body froze up. I fell to my knees. My cousins came and picked me up and put me in the back of the truck and drove me back to Grandma's house. And, of course, their explanation, being good Methodists, was that I was dehydrated or whatever. But I've never forgotten that. And when you talked about that kind of experience being common, I felt validated a little bit. And I'm going to keep thinking about it.
Well, it truly is common. Also in the book, I cite examples of people who will say things like, well, I used to think Satan was a myth, or I didn't believe in demons. Then this happened to me. Now I know it's not a myth. That kind of thing.
Right.
So these experiences, the bad experiences, can induce a sort of conversion also, right?
Yeah. So
a change of belief.
Right, and that's maybe the last question I want to ask you as we wrap up. Thank you for the extra time today. But do you feel like, or in what way do you feel like these experiences that we're talking about support biblical claims about God and the Christian God in particular? And how do you see these sort of experiences leading people to deeper faith in God?
Okay, so I guess I would say, speaking first as a sort of Bible guy, what they do is they add plausibility to what I would call the biblical world. So the biblical world is a world of religious experiences. It's a world of visions. How many visions are there in the Bible? It is a world of angels and so on. So for me, it's not as though these experiences prove specifically Christian doctrine. What they do is they show you that the distance that you can have, or the distance you can sense between the biblical world and your world, is not so great. It's not. So I'm the opposite of a Protestant cessationist. A Protestant cessationist, in effect, says lots of things happened in the biblical times,
right,
but nothing happens since then that you can't explain, or is anything more than some weak version of providence. No, I think that the biblical world, in which amazing things happen and weird things happen, and there are unexplained healings and so on, I think it's the same world. All right, it's the same world. It has different people. And, some of the biblical stories are important in ways that nothing else is now. But I think it's the same world. So it's maybe it's apologetics that way, okay?
Yeah.
All right. And at one point I say, for example, that this experience of transcendent love is consistent with Christian doctrine. It's consistent with the proposition that God is love, right? Which is a New Testament statement. But people in other religions can also believe in a benevolent, transcendent something, right? And they will have different names. So that doesn't confirm specifically Christian doctrine, but it's consistent with Christian doctrine. So that's the way I look at it. And then to go back to what I said earlier, for me, these experiences, the sort of thing in this book, make theology possible. They make it possible, whereas in the world, the academic world I was trained in, theology wasn't possible. It just was something people used to do, but we don't do it anymore because we've grown up and learned that there are no invisible realities.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right. That's right. Well, that's why we need people like you, experts like you, Dr. Allison, that are out there leading the charge. I know you don't like it, but I'm going to stick to my guns on that one. You've proven yourself to be expert status. So I'm so grateful to you for spending your time with us today and for writing this wonderful book. The Maybe God team has been digging into it here. Our producer, Julie, has loved it, and I'm getting into it as well. So I hope everybody listening on and watching on Maybe God on our YouTube channel will pick up Dr. Allison's book. You can find it just about anywhere. I know it's on Amazon. Godless Amazon, as Dr. Allison called it earlier, called Encountering Mystery, Religious Experience in a Secular Age. And Dr. Allison, thank you again for your time, and we'll be praying for your continued ministry and education, educating new generations of Christians and students at Princeton. So.
Thanks so much, Eric, for having me. I enjoyed it.
Of course, anytime. Thank you so much. And everybody watching on YouTube, be sure to leave your thoughts, questions, and just comments in the comment section on the YouTube channel. We look forward to responding to those. Thank you for tuning in for this interview. Bye-bye.